Graham Thornton was 32 years old when the embossed wedding invitation arrived at his modest apartment in Mississauga, Ontario. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive, the kind that cost $8 each from a boutique stationery shop. His name was written in elegant calligraphy, Mr. Graham Thornton. No +1. He opened it slowly, already knowing what he would find inside. His ex-wife, Sienna Caldwell, formerly Sienna Thornton, was getting married. Again. To someone else. Someone better. Someone who wasn't him. The invitation confirmed what he'd heard through mutual friends for the past 3 months. Sienna was marrying Reed Blackwell, a commercial real estate developer who drove a Range Rover Sport worth $98,000 and wore suits that cost more than Graham's monthly rent. The wedding would be held at the Fairmont Royal York in downtown Toronto. Black tie required, reception to follow. But it was the handwritten note tucked inside that made Graham's stomach turn. "Graham, I know we ended badly, but I want you there to see what real success looks like. Consider it closure. You'll finally understand why I left. Sienna." Graham sat on his worn IKEA couch, still holding the invitation, and let himself remember. 3 years ago, Sienna had packed her designer clothes into Louis Vuitton suitcases, worth $4,000 each, looked him dead in the eye, and said the words that had haunted him every single day since. "You're never going to be anything, Graham. You're plain-looking at best, you have no ambition, and honestly, I'm embarrassed to be married to someone so mediocre. My friends ask what my husband does, and I have to say you're a junior accountant making $46,000 a year. Do you know how humiliating that is?" They'd been married for 4 years. Graham had worked 60-hour weeks at Morrison Financial Group, while Sienna finished her marketing degree at Ryerson University. He'd paid her tuition, $15,000 per year. He'd covered their rent on a cramped one-bedroom apartment near Yonge and Eglinton that cost $2,200 monthly. He'd bought her a used Honda Civic for her birthday because she'd complained about taking the TTC. And when she'd graduated and landed a job at a prestigious advertising agency, making $67,000 annually, she'd looked at Graham like he was an anchor dragging her down. The divorce had been quick and brutal. Sienna had hired an expensive lawyer from a Bay Street firm. Graham had represented himself because he couldn't afford legal fees. She'd walked away with half of their savings, $12,000, the furniture, and her dignity intact. Graham had kept his beaten-down Toyota Corolla, and his shame. For the first year after the divorce, Graham had barely functioned. He'd go to work, come home, eat instant ramen that cost 89 cents per package, and sleep. His mother, Fiona, who lived in Scarborough and worked as a dental hygienist, had called him every Sunday. "You're better off without her, sweetheart," she'd say gently. That girl only loved what people could do for her, not who they were. Graham had wanted to believe her. But late at night, alone in his empty apartment, Sienna's words echoed in his head. Plain-looking. No ambition. Mediocre. What if she was right? Now, sitting with her wedding invitation, Graham made a decision that surprised even himself. He was going to attend. Not because he wanted to see Sienna marry someone else. Not because he had any illusions about winning her back. But because something had changed in the 3 years since their divorce. Something Sienna didn't know about. Something that made her invitation, meant to humiliate him. The greatest gift she could have given him. Before I continue with Graham's story, I need to ask you something. If you're tired of watching good people get pushed around, and you believe everyone deserves their moment of truth, then subscribe to Story Mode Folktales right now. Hit that like button because this story is about to get intense. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because I love knowing that our community spans the entire world. Now let's find out what Graham has been hiding. 18 months after his divorce, Graham had still been working at Morrison Financial Group. His supervisor, Connor McLeish, had pulled him aside one afternoon in March. "Graham, you've been here for 6 years. You're good with numbers, better than anyone else in this department. But you're stuck in a junior position because you never ask for more. Why is that?" Graham had shrugged. "I guess I'm just not that ambitious." Connor had studied him for a long moment. "That's what someone told you to believe, but I don't buy it. I think you're afraid of failure. There's a difference." That conversation had planted a seed. Graham had started taking online courses in financial analysis and corporate strategy. He'd spent his evenings, the ones that used to be filled with self-pity, studying for his chartered financial analyst designation. He'd passed all 3 levels in 18 months, a process that usually took 3 years. 6 months ago, Connor had called Graham into his office again. "I'm leaving Morrison to start my own financial consulting firm. I want you to come with me as a partner, not an employee, a partner, 50-50 split." Graham had stared at him. "Connor, I don't have capital to invest. I can't." "I don't need your money, Graham. I need your brain. I've watched you turn around 3 struggling portfolios in the last year. You see patterns other people miss. You're careful but not timid. You're exactly who I need. So what do you say?" Graham had said yes. McLeish Thornton Financial Consultancy had launched 4 months ago. They'd started with 3 clients, small business owners who needed help managing their investments. Word had spread quickly. By month 3, they had 17 clients with a combined portfolio worth $11 million. Graham's income had jumped from $46,000 annually to approximately $230,000 in his first year, with projections to double that in year 2. Graham had bought a condo in Liberty Village, a 2-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. He'd purchased it outright for $645,000, using the savings he'd been building since the divorce. He'd traded his beaten Toyota Corolla for a Tesla Model 3, $47,000, not because he cared about impressing anyone, but because he'd wanted something reliable and efficient. He'd also started taking better care of himself. He'd joined a gym, hired a personal trainer who cost $120 per session, and dropped 28 pounds. He'd updated his wardrobe, not with flashy designer labels, but with well-fitted clothes that actually matched. He'd gotten a better haircut from a proper barber who charged $45 instead of the $12 chop shops he'd used during his marriage. Graham hadn't transformed into some movie star, and he didn't want to. But he'd become a version of himself that he actually recognized and respected. The man in the mirror didn't look mediocre anymore. He looked focused, capable, successful. And Sienna had no idea. Graham had deliberately kept his success quiet. He hadn't updated his social media profiles. He'd unfriended or blocked most of their mutual connections. The few people who knew both of them, like his cousin Megan, who worked in Sienna's building, had promised not to mention anything about Graham's transformation. "Let her find out the hard way," Megan had said with a wicked grin. "That woman deserves a reality check." Now, holding the wedding invitation, Graham saw his opportunity. Sienna thought she was inviting her pathetic ex-husband to witness her triumph. She wanted him to see her in a designer wedding dress that probably cost $15,000, marrying a wealthy man, surrounded by success and luxury. She wanted him to feel small. But Graham had other plans. He called Connor that evening. "I need your help with something." "It's personal." Connor listened as Graham explained the invitation and Sienna's note. When Graham finished, Connor burst out laughing. "Are you kidding me? This is perfect. We're going to make this the best night of your life and the worst night of hers." "I don't want revenge," Graham said carefully. "I just want her to see the truth." Sometimes, my friend, the truth is the best revenge. The next morning, Graham went to Holt Renfrew and spent $4,200 on a custom-tailored tuxedo. He scheduled an appointment at a high-end grooming salon for the day before the wedding. He booked a suite at the Fairmont Royal York, the same hotel where the wedding would be held, for $1,200 per night. And he RSVP'd to the wedding. Attending. No +1 needed. The day of Sienna's wedding arrived on a crisp Saturday in October. Graham woke up in his suite at the Fairmont Royal York at 8 in the morning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Toronto, the CN Tower rising in the distance against a cloudless blue sky. He ordered room service for breakfast: scrambled eggs, smoked salmon, fresh fruit, and French press coffee. Total cost: $67. He barely noticed the price. At 2 in the afternoon, Graham showered and dressed carefully. The custom tuxedo fit him perfectly, emphasizing the muscle he'd built over the past year. His shoes were Italian leather, $800, polished to a mirror shine. He looked at himself in the full-length mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Not because he'd changed so dramatically on the outside, but because the defeated look in his eyes was completely gone. The wedding ceremony was scheduled for 5 in the evening in the Fairmont's Imperial Ballroom. Graham arrived at 4:45, deliberately late enough to avoid awkward small talk, but early enough to find a seat in the back. The ballroom had been transformed into something out of a magazine. Thousands of white roses, at least $15 per stem, created walls of flowers along the aisle. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner, probably costing $3,000 for the afternoon. Graham found a seat in the last row. He watched as guests filtered in, many of them people he'd known during his marriage to Sienna, old friends who'd stopped returning his calls after the divorce. Colleagues from Sienna's agency who'd always looked at Graham with barely disguised pity. Sienna's family, who'd never thought he was good enough for their daughter. No one recognized him at first. Why would they? The Graham Thornton they remembered had been 20 pounds heavier, poorly dressed, and carried himself like someone constantly apologizing for existing. This man in the custom tuxedo, sitting straight-backed and relaxed, might as well have been a stranger. Then Sienna's mother, Paige Caldwell, walked past his row. She was a tall woman who wore her wealth like armor. Pearl necklace worth $8,000, Chanel suit worth $12,000, permanent expression of vague disapproval. She glanced at Graham, looked away, then snapped her head back. "Graham!" Her voice was sharp with shock. "Hello, Paige. You look well." She stared at him, her eyes traveling from his expensive haircut to his tailored tuxedo to his confident posture. "I didn't realize you were coming. Sienna invited me personally. Wouldn't miss it for the world." Paige's mouth opened and closed. Before she could say anything else, the music changed. The wedding march began. Everyone stood. Sienna appeared at the back of the ballroom on her father's arm. Graham had to admit she looked beautiful. Her dress was champagne-colored silk, probably designer, probably the $15,000 he'd estimated. Her hair was styled in elaborate curls, her makeup perfect. She glowed with confidence and satisfaction. As she walked down the aisle, her eyes scanned the crowd, soaking in the attention. Then she saw Graham. He watched her stumble slightly, her confident smile faltering for just a moment. Her father had to steady her. She blinked, clearly not trusting her eyes. Graham smiled politely and turned his attention to the ceremony. He didn't need to watch her reaction. He could feel her shock from 30 feet away. The ceremony was elegant and impersonal. The officiant spoke about love and commitment with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. Reed Blackwell, the groom, was exactly what Graham expected. Tall, handsome in a generic way, expensive watch worth $42,000. smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked at Sienna the way someone might look at a prized possession, proud of what he'd acquired. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd applauded politely. Sienna and Reed kissed, a practiced performance for the audience, and walked back down the aisle together. As they passed Graham's row, Sienna's eyes found his again. This time she wasn't shocked, she was calculating. Graham could almost see the questions racing through her mind. The reception was held in the adjacent ballroom, transformed into an opulent wonderland. Ice sculptures, probably costing $8,000 each. Champagne fountains flowing with Dom Perignon, $300 per bottle. A 12-piece orchestra, likely $15,000 for the evening. Centerpieces made of orchids flown in from Thailand, $50 per stem, 20 stems per table, 40 tables. The math made Graham wince. This wedding probably cost $300,000 or more. Graham found his assigned seat at table 17, far from the wedding party. He was seated with distant relatives of the groom and a few uncomfortable-looking couples who seemed equally out of place among the ostentatious wealth on display. Perfect, he could observe without being the center of attention. If you're enjoying watching Graham take control of his narrative, make sure you're subscribed to Story Mode Folktales. Hit that notification bell because we post stories like this every single day. Stories about people who refuse to stay down, who rebuild themselves, and who show up exactly when they're least expected. Stay tuned because what happens next is going to blow your mind. The dinner service began promptly at 7. 5 courses of expertly prepared food that Graham barely tasted. His attention was on the wedding party table at the front of the room. Sienna kept glancing in his direction, her expression growing more agitated each time. Reed seemed oblivious, laughing with his groomsmen and downing expensive scotch like water. After dinner, the speeches began. Reed's best man told a crude story about bachelor parties in Vegas that made half the room uncomfortable. Sienna's maid of honor, a woman named Chloe, who'd been Sienna's roommate in university, gave a gushing tribute to true love that rang hollow. Then Sienna's father stood to give his toast. Malcolm Caldwell was a corporate lawyer who'd made his fortune defending pharmaceutical companies. He wore his success like a weapon. "My daughter has always had excellent taste," he began, smiling at Reed. "She knows quality when she sees it. She knows that in life, you either settle for mediocrity or you reach for excellence. Today, she's chosen excellence." Graham saw Sienna glance at him during this speech. The message was clear. Reed was excellence. Graham had been mediocrity. The contrast was intentional. Malcolm continued, "I remember when Sienna was married before." A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. That was a learning experience. She was young, didn't know her worth, settled for someone who couldn't provide the life she deserved. But we all make mistakes when we're young. The key is learning from them and moving forward to something better. Someone better. The crowd applauded. Graham took a sip of water and smiled to himself. Let them have their moment. His time was coming. The dancing began at 9. Graham watched as Sienna and Reed performed their choreographed first dance, probably learned from a professional instructor at $200 per hour. The crowd oohed and awed appropriately. Then, as the dance floor opened to guests, Graham saw his opening. He stood, straightened his jacket, and walked directly toward the wedding party table. Every step was measured, confident. People began to notice. Conversations paused. Eyes followed him. Sienna saw him coming and her face went pale. Reed was talking to a groomsman, completely unaware. Graham stopped directly in front of Sienna. "Congratulations on your wedding," he said quietly. "You look beautiful, as always." Sienna's voice came out strangled. Graham, I didn't expect you to actually come. You invited me, said you wanted me to see what real success looks like. I thought it would be rude to decline. Up close, Graham could see the panic in her eyes. She'd expected him to show up broken, defeated, a walking reminder of the life she'd escaped. Instead, he stood before her in a $4,000 tuxedo, looking healthier and more confident than she'd ever seen him. You look different, she managed. 3 years is a long time. People change. Reed finally noticed the conversation and turned around. Who's this? He asked, his tone friendly but proprietary. His arm snaked around Sienna's waist. This is Graham, Sienna said quickly. My ex-husband. Reed's expression shifted from friendly to guarded. Oh, the accountant? Financial consultant, actually, Graham corrected pleasantly. I run my own firm, McLeish Thornton Financial Consultancy. We specialize in high net worth portfolio management. Reed's eyes narrowed. Never heard of it. We're selective about our clients. Word of mouth only. We don't advertise. Sienna was staring at Graham like she'd never seen him before. You run your own firm? For about 4 months now. It's going well. We just signed our 23rd client last week, managing about $18 million total at this point. Should hit $30 million by end of year if growth continues at current pace. The silence that followed was deafening. Sienna's mouth opened, but no words came out. Reed looked between them, clearly confused about why his wife was so shocked by this information. Graham smiled. Anyway, I just wanted to congratulate you both. Beautiful ceremony. Enjoy your evening. He turned to walk away, but Sienna grabbed his arm. Wait, Graham, can we talk? Privately? I don't think that's appropriate, Graham said gently, glancing at Reed. It's your wedding day. You should be with your husband. Please, just 5 minutes. There's a terrace outside. Reed's expression darkened. Sienna, what's going on? Nothing. I just need to speak with Graham for a moment. Old business to clear up. Before Reed could protest, Sienna was pulling Graham toward the French doors that led to an outdoor terrace overlooking the city. The October air was cold, but Sienna didn't seem to notice. The terrace was empty, illuminated by soft uplighting and the glow of downtown Toronto spreading out beneath them. Sienna released Graham's arm and turned to face him, her carefully applied makeup cracking at the edges. You run your own firm, she said, not a question but an accusation. You manage $18 million. About that, yes. When did this happen? The firm launched 4 months ago, but I've been building toward it for the past 18 months, since about 6 months after our divorce. Sienna's hands were shaking. She gripped the terrace railing. Why didn't I know? Why would you? We haven't spoken in 3 years. You made it very clear you wanted nothing to do with me. Graham, She paused, struggling with something. You were supposed to stay mediocre. You were supposed to be the mistake I moved on from. There it was. The truth, raw and ugly. Graham leaned against the railing beside her, careful to maintain distance. That's what you needed me to be, so you could feel good about leaving, so you could tell yourself you upgraded. But I was never actually mediocre, Sienna. I was just young and hurt and trying to make a marriage work with someone who'd already given up. I supported you through university, Graham continued quietly. I paid your tuition. I worked overtime to cover our rent. I gave you everything I had because I loved you and I believed in you. And the moment you didn't need me anymore, you threw me away. You called me plain-looking, unambitious, mediocre. You made me believe I was worthless. Tears were running down Sienna's face now, cutting tracks through her expensive makeup. I was cruel. I know I was cruel. You were honest about how you felt. I can't fault you for that. But you were wrong about who I was. And that's on you, not me. How much do you make now? The question came out desperate. Graham considered not answering. But he'd come here for honesty, hadn't he? For closure. This year I'll clear about $230,000. Next year probably $400,000 if our growth projections hold. By year 5, Connor and I estimate we'll each be pulling in close to $750,000 annually. Sienna actually gasped. The sound was strangled, painful. That's more than Reed makes. I didn't come here to compete with your husband, Sienna. Then why did you come? She demanded, anger flashing in her eyes. To humiliate me? To show me what I gave up? No, Graham said simply. I came because you invited me. You wanted me to see what real success looks like. And I wanted you to see the same thing. Success isn't a Range Rover or a designer dress or a wedding that costs more than most people make in 5 years. Real success is becoming someone you're proud of. Someone who knows their worth doesn't come from what other people think of them. I made a mistake, Sienna whispered. Leaving you was a mistake. Graham shook his head. No, it wasn't. We made each other miserable. You resented me for not being ambitious enough. I resented you for making me feel inadequate. We were toxic together. Leaving was the right call. But if I'd just waited, if I'd supported you instead of… Sienna, stop. Graham's voice was firm, but not unkind. You didn't make me successful. Your leaving did. You want to know the truth? When you walked out and told me I'd never be anything, something inside me broke. But something else woke up. I realized I'd been living my life trying to make you happy, trying to be enough for you, instead of figuring out who I actually was and what I actually wanted. He turned to face her fully. Connor offered me a partnership because of skills I developed after you left. Skills I had time to develop because I wasn't spending all my energy managing your disappointment in me. I'm not saying you were the villain in our marriage. We were both wrong for each other. But leaving was the best thing you could have done for both of us. I'm not happy, Sienna admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Reed is successful, yes. He's everything on paper I thought I wanted. But he's distant. He cares more about his business deals than about me. His friends are shallow. His family treats me like an accessory. This wedding? It wasn't about love. It was about image. His image. Graham felt a pang of sympathy, but also clarity. That's not my problem to solve anymore. You made your choice. You chose what looked good over what felt right. Now you have to live with that choice, the same way I had to live with the consequences of our divorce. Would you ever consider… Sienna started. No, Graham interrupted gently. Whatever you're about to ask, the answer is no. I don't want you back. I don't want to be friends. I don't want to stay in touch. I came here tonight for one reason only, to prove to myself that I've moved on. And I have. Sienna crumpled slightly, her shoulders sagging. I really did love you once, you know. In the beginning. I know, Graham said. And I loved you, but that was a long time ago. We're different people now. The terrace door opened behind them. Reed stood silhouetted in the doorway, his expression thunderous. What's going on out here? Sienna, people are asking where you are. It's your wedding reception. Sienna wiped her eyes quickly, trying to salvage her makeup. I'm coming. We were just finishing up. Reed's eyes narrowed as he looked at Graham. I don't know what you're playing at, showing up here looking like you do, but stay away from my wife. Reed, it's not… Sienna started. I mean it, Reed interrupted, his voice hard. I know about guys like you, ex-husbands who can't move on, but Sienna chose me. She chose better. So whatever pathetic attempt this is to win her back, it's not going to work. Graham almost laughed. Reed had completely misread the situation. But then, guys like Reed always did. They saw the world as a competition they'd already won. You're absolutely right, Graham said, surprising both of them. Sienna did choose better. She chose what she wanted. I genuinely hope you both find happiness together. He looked at Sienna one last time. Goodbye, Sienna. Thank you for inviting me. This was exactly the closure I needed. He walked past Reed into the reception hall, leaving them both standing on the terrace. Behind him, he heard Sienna's voice crack as she said something to Reed, but Graham didn't look back. He'd said everything he needed to say. Graham collected his coat from the check and left the reception without speaking to anyone else. He took the elevator up to his suite, changed out of his tuxedo, and stood at the window overlooking the city. His phone buzzed. A text from Connor. How did it go? Graham typed back. Better than expected. I'll tell you Monday. Another text came through, this one from his mother. Proud of you. Sweetheart, whatever happened tonight, know that you're worth more than that girl ever deserved. Graham smiled. He texted back, Thanks, Mom. Love you. He stood at the window until the lights of the city began to blur together. Tomorrow, he'd check out of the hotel, go back to his condo in Liberty Village, and continue building the life he'd created for himself. A life based on his own standards, his own definition of success, his own sense of worth. Sienna had invited him to her wedding to show him what he'd lost. Instead, she'd shown him exactly what he'd gained. Freedom from someone else's expectations, confidence in his own value, and the peace that comes from knowing you don't need anyone's validation but your own. If Graham's story resonated with you, if you've ever been told you weren't good enough and proved them wrong, then subscribe to Story Mode Folktales right now. We share stories every single day about people who refuse to let others define their worth. Hit that like button and drop a comment about your own comeback story, because everyone deserves to celebrate their victories, no matter how big or small. The lesson Graham learned wasn't about revenge or proving his ex-wife wrong. It was simpler and more powerful. The people who underestimate you give you the greatest gift of all. They give you motivation. But you have to do the work yourself. You have to choose growth over bitterness, progress over resentment, becoming over blaming. Success isn't about making others regret losing you. It's about becoming someone you're proud to be, regardless of who's watching. And sometimes the best response to someone who called you mediocre isn't anger or vengeance. It's simply becoming excellent and then walking away. Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe so you never miss another story about turning pain into power and setbacks into comebacks.